Welcome to Superhero Pow. I'm your host nerd, Tom Friendly. Okay, we had fun trying to name the best comic books ever. Now let's do the reverse. The worst comic books ever. I think it's safe to say that the contenders for the worst comic books ever greatly outnumbers the contenders for the best comic books ever. In the golden age, now in quotes, several get-rich-quick companies jumped on the comic book bandwagon and printed a lot of terrible stuff. Then, of course, when we got into the 1980s, with all the so-called independent publishers putting out comics, a lot of them were not really ready for prime time. The 1990s had the bad girl boom, which was just, draw boobs and guns and you were good to go. And even DC and Marvel throughout the years have had real bombs. One that I always like to pick on is Mike Baron's Sonic Disruptors, a 12-issue miniseries, or maxi series if you prefer, that never made it past issue number 7. Now I feel it's important to point out that, one man's trash is another man's treasure. I'm sure there's a fan for everything out there, even Sonic Disruptors. So this is not to critique the talent of the comic book, because even Mike Baron himself has created some great and even iconic comic books. So a couple of stinkers in your portfolio is inevitable. Even the beyond awesome George Perez had a flop with his last comic book, Sirens. Mind you, it looked great, like always, but the story, woof, talk about a word salad. So we should always try to laugh with the creator and not at them. But if they still refuse to accept that their work failed to communicate to readers what they wanted it to, and the world is just full of haters, well, just pat them on the back and say, all right, no reason to roll around in the mud over it. To get more artsy-fartsy, this is my BSA talking, I'll try to define artistic failure. You see, a creator usually makes something to communicate something to their audience. We'll just forget doing it for a paycheck at this point. Make the audience laugh, make them cry.
Ooh, anxious.
Whatever. The point is, when the work doesn't make the audience feel what the creator wanted, then the creator has failed. But sometimes the intention is to make the audience mad and offend them. Therefore, if the audience gets mad and hates what the creator made, calling it junk and crap and the worst ever, well, the creator actually succeeded in doing what he wanted to do. So the work's not really crap. But getting back to the worst comic books ever, aside from the art and the writing, there is one more thing to consider with bad comic books, and that's hype. The bigger the hype, the bigger the fall, I say, or at least starting now. So if some no-name creator makes a comic for some no-name publisher and it's just awful, who cares? I really don't think something like that is worth mentioning as the worst thing ever. Unless I suppose it's transcendent, like, Tommy Wiseau's movie The Room. But most of the time it's got to be big in order to be bad, at least to me. So as I thought about this and looked over many comic books, one just popped into my head. This has got to be the worst comic ever, right? Frank Miller's 2011 Holy Terror. I mean, it was supposed to be a Batman comic book, but as he was working on it, DC said, no thanks. Now, Miller claims he told DC no, but I'm not so sure I buy that story. So Miller turned Batman into the Fixer, and you can even see the ghost lines of Batman's ears on him in the comic. And everybody hated it. Now, mind you, while working on it, Miller said this was going to offend everybody, but even today, Frank has mentioned that he's kind of uncomfortable with it. So what's the next worst comic ever? Something really big and really hated. Well, I guess Frank Miller's 2001, The Dark Knight Strikes Again, right? I mean, once again, it's Frank Miller, one of the most respected comic book creators of all time. His Batman The Dark Knight series is one of the greatest books of all time. And we were all begging him to make a sequel for decades. And then he gave it to us. Wow, did he give it to us. Heck, when DC let him do a third one, they hired an army of creators to hold his hand. And now Frank has said he wants to do a Dark Knight 4, and I don't think DC's returning his calls. All right, let's think of another one. Something really big, really hate it, and maybe like Sonic Disruptors, it didn't even finish. And I think we're back to Frank Miller again. His 2005 All-Star Batman and Robin. And this time he was even teamed with the most talented and popular artist of all time, Jim Lee. And the 12-issue series started really well. Everybody was blown away, but then, yikes. Even Jim Lee's artwork couldn't explain what the heck was going on in these pages. And seemingly, Frank just stopped writing it, even though it was selling pretty good. And by default, the book was canceled after only 6 issues. I'm pretty sure Mike Baron could have finished Sonic Disruptors if DC let him. But wow. Okay, I'm not sure how the top 3 worst comics of all time were done by Frank Miller, but here we are. Surely I must be missing something. Something from the early days of Image Comics, maybe? Yeah, but then again, I just lean more towards Frank Miller's work because these were supposed to be some of the best comic books ever. But nope. What do you think I missed? Or do you completely disagree with these being the 3 worst comic books ever? Be sure to let me know. And thanks for spending time with me on this quickie talkie talk. And if you could be so kind to like, subscribe, and notify, I promise to stop picking on Sonic Disruptors. No, I won't.